Hey yo, what's up, everybody? I've been quarantined for quite a while now and decided that instead of binging one more Netflix weird this kind of stuff, show, series, maybe I'll take some time and try to share a little of the knowledge that I have. I've been building web applications for a little over a decade now, and unfortunately, I didn't learn too much, but I did learn some. So, what I did, I will definitely try to share. First of all, why the hell do I need to listen to another web of tutorial? You're probably asking yourself. I personally love learning from videos, and well, I've looked online, YouTube and Google and stuff like that, and couldn't really find one that I think explains stuff how I would explain them. Don't get me wrong, there's tons of really great stuff out there and free stuff also, but nothing that covers the topic from how I think it should be covered, especially not for people with no experience who are absolute beginners. And why is that? It's because most tutorials I've seen out there are extremely opinionated, and even more, they don't always let you know they are opinionated, which makes it very hard to understand what you're actually learning, what you're just copy pasting, what they just shove down and feed you as given. It's really hard. And in this video or series of videos, I will try to cover all the subject I think you should understand, including the concepts behind them. So I'm not just gonna jump into something. I'm gonna talk about why, where, and how it exists. And then you can choose for yourself what you want to use, what you don't want to use, what you want to learn more of, and how. The other question you're probably asking yourself, or at least you should be asking yourself, is why the hell the internet? Why a web application? And what's special about it? Well, to explain this better, I will go very briefly into the history of the web, how it is what it is today, and I will explain why I think it is important. So, first of all, our story goes back all the way to 1957 when the Soviet Union launched a satellite into outer space called Sputnik 1. Yep, that's where the idea of the internet started. The Americans panicked because of this launch and opened up something called ARPANET, which stands for the Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. Some really top level government secret agency, men in black kind of stuff. And one of the projects of this agency was actually to create a network that, in case of a massive missile attack against multiple bases, US bases spread out in the country, if some bases are taken out but some remain, the rest are still connected and the US will be able to respond or launch a counterattack. That way, you can't actually take all of the nodes, all of the bases at once. And thus was born the idea of the internet. Now, it's not a history lesson. There's tons of history stuff. We're gonna jump and skip a few decades into the futures, all the way to the mid 90s. And the web started taking the form and the shape we know it is today. There was ISPs, modems, internet started going into our homes and penetrating our personal computers. There was softwares like Netscape Navigators, if you remember it. You bought CD-ROMs. The Backstreet Boys were a thing. It was at this point that a new emerging software gained incredible momentum, incredible speed, and it was called, you guessed it, the browser. The browser is actually where we're going to run all of the software. This is why it's called a web application, because it runs on the web. The web means it runs on browsers. It was hoped that since these browsers run on all devices and platforms, we could escape the need for operating systems and move programs to the internet, to be online, to the browsers, where everyone and every platform will have free access to them. It did manage to do that to some extent, but not completely. Obviously, there's still, I don't know, operating systems, Mac, Windows, stuff like that. So why do I think you needed to know all this for building a web app? Since part of the web pattern, or part of its core principles, is since it's changing by nature so fast over the years, it's so random how it started and what it is today, so do also the technologies behind it. It's used today for reading content, news, using social media, playing video games, watching movies, working out, learning, teaching, goofing around, so much more. And with all these abilities come many different technologies, many different frameworks, many different languages. So understanding how to keep up with these technologies and what you need to learn and how is part of the mentality of being a web developer. And that is also something I want you to adopt fast in this course. Instead of copying and pasting some basic jargon, ask yourself how, why, and what for. Go out there and find resources about the subject that interests you. Okay, Okay. What actually are we gonna learn? I'm gonna try to cover all or most of the terminology, also known as mumbo jumbo, of what you need to start building and deploying a web application from start to finish for someone who has never done this before and knows absolutely nothing. I'm also going to talk about what tools, software to use, and how to pick them, which site you can use for references, which directions you can research more deeply. And I don't know if it's going to be a short video since I'm just starting it, but I'm going to post on YouTube, so it is going to be free. Also, remember I said I will try to keep this unopinionated. Of course, at some point I will choose specific tools and frameworks to get stuff running because we can't do anything from scratch, but we will discuss why we chose them, some alternatives to those decisions, and what else you can think of. As you can tell, I will probably derail a lot talking about subjects that I have personal opinions on and I'm passionate about, but these are my own opinions, so take them with a grain of salt, or better yet, just don't take them personally. You can always pause and skip ahead and stuff like that. It's a video. All right, now that we've got all that shit out of the way, let's jump in and talk about the very basics. And we're gonna start with this very, very simple diagram of our friend. Let's call him Bob. And Bob has a laptop, right? Or a PC or even a phone. Just write it down. And he opens up a software called, we talked about it, the browser. And this is what we want to talk about today. When I type in the browser some kind of URL, some kind of address, what happens? This is a very long question. There's tons of stuff happening on many different levels. Some inside the software, the browser itself, others on the network side of things, and then going through the ISPs, and on the server happens a lot of things. I want to talk about the very basic flow, and I want to talk about mainly the terminology so we understand what it is we need to know and why. First of all, like we discussed, I'm typing in address. Our example was google.com, but it can be any address on the internet, any URL you are typing. Computers don't know names, so when I say google.com, how the hell does he know where to go? Imagine somewhere in the world there's this book. We're also going to call it a registrar. So each entry in this book has two values. One is some kind of human readable name. In our example, it would be google.com. And the other entry, which it maps to, is some kind of number, actually four number of the maximum 3 digits, which is called an IP address. This is called a DNS. It looks something kind of like this. You can put in any 3 number just to get the idea. And you've probably heard or seen this before, but even if you don't worry. I'm assuming that my computer has some kind of access to this book, so he knows to go to this address. And then somewhere online, somewhere inside the world, there's a server. And this server is located, its address is the same address that I try to go to. This is how my browser knows when I type google.com to go to this server. Now, let's talk about some more basic terms. A server is a computer, like any computer. You can imagine it as a scary room full of supercomputers or as your home personal computers. Both can be servers. The only idea behind a server, and it's also how it gets his name, he's serving you something. In our case, he's serving a response. Any computer on the internet can be a server, and once you connect to this server, or I'm trying to make a connection to this server, then I am called a client. These are just basic terms that we were going to need to know. So let me just call myself a client just to make sure we understand. And I'm going to the server. So I'm making a request to this server. At this point, we went to google.com and we asked him for something. We typed its URL in the browser, but then the browser itself renders a page and I can use it, and depends on where I went online, I can do different things. But what exactly did my browser receive? What did it get that it can now render this thing? And that's what we're going to talk about now. We're going to talk about what the server returned to the browser. And let's just assume this is some kind of package, some kind of nicely wrapped gift. To understand how this package looks, we're going to have to talk about how the server and the client communicate. And basically, they have this set type of communication called a protocol. It's just like agreeing on a language. So imagine if I walk down the street and I started, I don't know, talking in Mandarin, and someone comes and starts talking English to me. We might have useful stuff to say to each other, but we won't be able to understand each other. So a protocol is just agreeing on how to talk to each other. In our case, when a browser and server communicates, the protocol is called HTTP, or short for Hypertext Transfer Protocol. So in this package, the server which communicates with me through the protocol HTTP returns something which is called an HTML. That is an HTML page. This is how browsers work. And notice that HTTP, the HT stands for hypertext, and HTML, the HT also stands for hypertext, which is why the protocol and the response are similar. We're going to talk about the HTML that is returned. But also notice that it doesn't necessarily returns HTML, it also returns something called scripts, which are a set of code basically that the browser can run. And we're going to talk about this in a second. And CSS, which is styling. This is how our page will get its styles. And we're going to talk about every different aspect of every one of these things. It's also not completely accurate how I just drew this. Sometimes the server will return one response, which could be just HTML or even something smaller. And then in subsequent requests, I'm going to ask for more and more scripts and more CSS. And eventually everything would get to the browser. So it doesn't have to be one package like I drew it. Just keep in mind. We've talked about the browser returning a package for us containing three very important types of data. And we'll dive into every one of these and explain them because they are the cornerstone of almost everything we're going to do, especially HTML. Everything we're going to learn is going to be based on HTML, and it's very important you understand this. HTML is a language which contains elements, and HTML elements are the building blocks of HTML pages, also known as web pages. It is a markup language, and in order to use this language, we have to understand its syntax. But just before we jump into it, to technical stuff like syntax and languages, it is important to understand that it is based on something called XML. If you understand the concept of XML and how to write XML, you will easily understand how HTML works. So, XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. XML was designed to be both human and machine readable. XML was designed to store and transport data. And that is the most important part you have to understand. It means that XML is a way to move data around the internet between servers and clients and more servers. Let me say this again. XML is a way to move data around and to structure data meant to be readable both by people and computers. But XML by itself does not do anything. It has no functionality. So you can structure any type of data you want, or almost any type of data you want in XML, as long as you adhere to its core principle. And the number one, the most important one you need to get comfortable with will be tags. Everything in XML, also in HTML, is based on the idea of tags. This is how a tag looks. Each tag has to be opened and closed with maybe exceptions we will mention later. Inside this tag, we can place either text or more tags. And that's it. That's all you have to know. With this basic rule, we can choose to structure any type of data in the world. And to make sure we really understand this, let's do a few random examples so you get the hang of it. Let's say I have a dog and its name is Bingo. And Bingo likes to scratch and roll. And when he is hungry, he likes to eat. And when he barks, he makes a rough sound. I want to structure this data with XML. So at this point, I don't want you to worry too much about tools. You can use whatever notepad you have on your computer, or maybe Google Docs, or anything that basically has text in it. Or if you don't want to, you can wait until we start using HTML. At this point, just watch and listen. That's enough. Let's start with a tag. This is the syntax of a tag, or more precisely, an opening tag. Each tag has to be closed. This is how a closing tag looks like. So we have an opening tag, which is just these two brackets, which are sharp brackets. There are in computer science called lesser than and greater than, or maybe in math, and that's how you might know these. They're on your keyboard, close to the right Alt or Command or Start button. You use these tags to hold information. So at this point, all I have is an opening tag called a dog, and I make sure to close it so the syntax is correct. Now, I can place more tags or text inside. I want to open another tag called name. His name is Bingo. And let me just close name. We have a tag called dog. Inside of it, we have another tag called name, and this is its opening tag, and this is its close tag. Now notice that name in the middle has the text bingo. It has some kind of value, but the dog tag also has stuff inside of it, which is the tag and the text. So it contains everything at this point. Also, one more thing which is critical to understand. If I write my data like this, there is no difference. A computer does not care if you write everything or if you write it like this or whatever, however you structure it. The only person who does care is you. We'll be using enters and indents just to make sure that we are neat and clean and we can understand what we write. What else does Bingo do? He likes to scratch and roll. So I can do something, maybe a tag called likes, and inside this tag likes, I'm gonna add scratch and roll. When he's hungry, he likes to eat. And when he barks, he makes a rough sound. So that makes me make a tag called sound. In the middle of it, say woof. I don't know, maybe like this. If you got this, that's great. And if not, I'm just gonna do one more small example to make sure we understand. Another type of XML data we might want is note. So I'm gonna start by opening and closing a note tag. This note is sent around the classroom. Maybe we can say that Bobby sent it to Alice. The type of note is a reminder, and what is actually written on the note is don't forget this weekend. Let's structure it by having a tag called from. Inside of it, we'll place whoever the note is from. So I'm opening a tag called from. The inside of it would be Bobby, and I'm closing the tag from, just the way you see it. I'm also gonna set who this note is to, so I'm gonna try and decide to open another tag called to, and in it, we're gonna say this is for Alice, okay? We said that the type of the note is a reminder, so I just use something called header. This is from something I could sing. I could also call this subject if I want. And notice that if I only change the beginning subject and left this one for header, we have a tag called subject, which is never closed, but a closing tag for header, which is never open. So this is going to be a syntax mistake. This is not a well-formed XML, which is not going to work. So we're going to change this to subject. And we talked about the note itself, which contains, I'm just going to talk about it like it's the body of the note. It says, don't forget this weekend. The document is still incorrect because the body tag, as you can see it here on the left, is never being closed. So let me close it. So hopefully you got the idea. This is just everything you need to know about writing XML, writing correct XML. And if you understood the idea of tags, open tags and closing tags and placing stuff inside of tags, HTML is going to be a piece of cake.